We'll move on to the Iltis inductions ceremony at this point. As indicated on the program, Iltis was a distinguished scientist, teacher, environmentalist, and passionate advocate for conservation. Hugh served as professor of botany at the UW-Madison and as director of the UW Herbarium. In the 1960s, he co-founded the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin, joined fellow citizen activists to help ban DDT, and promoted all aspects of environmental quality. He's also recognized internationally for his efforts to protect biosphere reserves in Mexico and South America and the discovery of rare plant species. Reading his bio, I also I'm sorry I never got to meet him. And the people, when I said that to someone else, they would oftentimes comment and say, well, probably a good thing, because he was kind of a feisty person as well, and he could also be a bit abrasive. So I'm sorry I missed that part of that man. But Tom, in your music, I think you sung well about that passionate spirit. We have the nomination material. I'd like to thank them, was from Mary Jean Houston. And Kate Harrington is oftentimes one of the people in the background who does so much for that organization. So I want to recognize Kate for all of your help in setting up things for this induction ceremony. I also want to recognize Frank Iltis for his work in helping us find speakers. And Frank is one that I have yet to meet. Is Frank here today?
Right here.
Hi, Frank.
Hi.
We've been on the emails and talking so often, but I haven't yet seen you. Thank you. Presentations. There are 5 presenters, but again, I gave them the same challenge. Confine your combined talking time to 30 minutes, and you can divide it up any way you want. So we'll be watching that. So please watch the clock up here. The first speaker will be Mary Jean Houston. She's the director of the Nature Conservancy of Wisconsin, followed by Theodore Cochran. He's a senior academic curator emeritus of the state herbarium and worked closely with Hugh for many, many years. And you'll see in a few minutes a picture of the two of them together at an identification table, I believe. And then Dr. Michael Nee, am I pronouncing that right, Michael? Michael Nee is the emeritus curator of the New York Botanical Garden and now research associate with the Missouri Botanical Garden. He loves to travel. Most of our correspondence was from South America back up here to me. So I wish I had been with you. Also, I believe a student working with you. And then the next presenter is Dr. Jose Antonio Vasquez, who is from Mexico and works with the Institute of Biology at the University of Guadalajara in Mexico. So he brought, I think, a contingent of people from that region of the world. So you're adding a little festival spirit to us today. Thank you for your travels. Lastly, the son of Hugh, Michael Iltis, will speak on behalf of the family. So we'll start with Mary Jean, and then come up right after you finish. And again, there's a clock up here. Please be timely.
Before I start my remarks about the remarkable scientist that we're about to induct into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, I'd like to say a few words about science. The Nature Conservancy as an organization is guided by science, and we could not do our work without it. In honor and recognition of their work, Nature Conservancy staff, trustees, and volunteers across the country will be marching in support of science today in Washington, D.C., across the country, and in Wisconsin, in Madison, in Milwaukee, here in Stevens Point, Minocqua, and beyond. And if Hugh Iltis was here today, I know he would be probably with them marching, or we know he would be with them in spirit. So here's to the scientists in the room in Wisconsin and around the world. Thank you for all that you do to explore our natural world and to give all of us in policy and conservation, nonprofits and governments, the information that we need to conserve natural areas today and for future generations. So it's great to be here today with all of you to celebrate three people who have done so much for the lands and waters that we all love. And I have the special honor and privilege of saying a few words about Dr. Hugh Iltis, a distinguished scientist, teacher, environmentalist, and a passionate spokesman for conservation. Hugh was also one of the three co-founders of the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin, and today he joins Gene Rourke and Dr. Joseph Hickey in the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Born in Czechoslovakia, Hugh came to Wisconsin in 1955, where he joined the faculty of the botany department at the University of Wisconsin. He became the curator and later the director of the University of Wisconsin Herbarium. Others will tell you more about his many accomplishments at the University of Wisconsin shortly. While he was at the university, together with Gene Rourke and Joe Hickey, Hugh founded the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin in 1960. Aware that special places of Wisconsin were being lost, and along with them the plant and animal life that they harbored, he joined with others who firmly believed that the importance of conserving our natural habitats for future generations. Hugh served on the Nature Conservancy's board for 16 years when the organization was completely led by volunteers. And during that time, he was a member of a technical committee that advised the chapter board on scientific aspects of natural areas that were being considered for acquisition. His knowledge of plant taxonomy and systematics was invaluable in helping this fledgling organization in identifying and prioritizing the most important places to protect. Those priorities included the Baraboo Hills and Spring Green Prairie in Sauk County, Chewauquee Prairie in Kenosha County, and the coastal wetlands in Door County. And these are all places where the Nature Conservancy continues to work today. Hugh helped build an organization that has protected more than 232,000 acres of Wisconsin's most beautiful and ecologically significant habitat across the state. Even after Hugh went off the Nature Conservancy board in the late 1970s, he remained very involved. Russ Van Herrick was hired as the Nature Conservancy's first state director in 1978. And he's told me several times the story of the day that he and Hugh met. Russ says, Hugh stomped into my office in my one-room basement office on University Avenue, the basement of the Academy of Sciences building. And he was the first person involved with the Nature Conservancy to find this little warren in the basement. Hugh slammed a stack of books and papers dramatically on the metal table, the gray metal surplus table in Russ's office. These were botany manuals, scientific publications, and journals. And he spun toward Russ and locked his gaze into Russ's eyes and said, "I'm Hugh Iltis. Don't even think of doing anything until you've read and understand all of these completely." And he turned and left. I, too, eventually had the privilege of working closely with Hugh Iltis, but even before I knew Dr. Iltis, I knew about him. I watched a documentary film that the Nature Conservancy put together back in 1987, and it was about the loss of native habitats and the importance of species conservation. Hugh was interviewed in this movie, and he was asked, among other things, what good is a species? And Hugh's retort was, well, what good are you? I was both impressed and a little intimidated about this outspoken professor who had discovered teosinte, a perennial wild relative of corn, and he had done so much to protect its habitat in Mexico. Then a year later, I had the great fortune to begin my career with the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin, buying land statewide for the organization. And I was fortunate to work directly with Hugh. He would come into the Nature Conservancy office, again armed with books and maps and opinions, and advice to talk about where the Nature Conservancy needed to be doing more to conserve precious habitats in Wisconsin. While I grew to love these visits from Hugh, I was not nervous about him coming. I was excited. It was a lot of fun. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say that he wasn't always the easiest person to get along with. Jean Rourke, who is the wife of our founder, Jean Rourke, the other founder of the Nature Conservancy, really said it best in her letter of support for Hugh's nomination. She said, "Dr. Iltis was not always the most diplomatic person. He could be impatient with people or institutions that did not see the bigger picture, the preservation of the Earth's natural resources. He was not afraid to name obstructionists or shake his head at people who thought too much in financial terms. But he was a fascinating speaker, and his audiences were always enthralled." Hugh believed that land and water conservation was an urgent issue that required all of our hands to be on the deck, and he traveled far and wide to spread that message. As a professor, Hugh taught and mentored countless people, many of whom went on to make their own marks and contributions to conservation around the world. Some of them shared their stories in letters of support for Hugh's nomination, including Pat Morton, who directed the Nature Conservancy's work in southeastern Wisconsin for several years. Pat wrote, "During my master's degree studies at the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Iltis inspired the passion for my work that wove through my long career in environmental conservation, including jobs with Bat Conservation International, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and the Nature Conservancy. Now, as a retiree and an ongoing volunteer for these organizations, I continue to build on the conservation foundation that had its roots in Hugh Iltis's classes. The passion is still there." And this one from Dave and Shelley Hamel, and Shelley is with us today to celebrate Hugh's induction into the Hall of Fame. "Hugh Iltis was a friend of ours for over 40 years, and if you're a friend of his, you are, by default, a student of his, because not a moment goes by when you aren't learning something. It is because of our association with a force like Hugh that in 1988 we bought 120 acres of woods and fallow crop field surrounded by a nice fringe of remnant prairie and savanna. With a nascent population of state-threatened and federally endangered Karner blue butterflies. We have dedicated our retired lives to its restoration and management, and the butterflies have come back, have increased 200-fold. We dedicated our acreage to Hugh in 2007, and we cemented a big fireproof metal sign visible from the road right among the sand prairie plants that he helped us identify and love. Perhaps others will be so inspired." There are more stories, but time is short, so I'll leave you today with one of Hugh's favorite quotes. "We are put on this earth to do one simple thing, and that is to be a good ancestor. Both from a biological and a moral standpoint, we cannot and we must not do less." I believe that Hugh did his utmost throughout his life to be a good ancestor. Thank you to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame for recognizing this extraordinary man's lifetime of passionate commitment to the conservation of our precious lands and waters. And now, Ted Cochran.
Besides doing research, teaching, lecturing, writing, publishing, and doing boots-on-the-ground conservation work, when Iltis came to Wisconsin, he made it one of his prime tasks to build the University of Wisconsin-Madison's herbarium, that is, its museum of preserved plant specimens and library of books, journals, reprints, and maps, into a superlative institution. This photo shows Iltis on the right and colleague John Thompson in the late 1950s displaying specimens in the herbarium. Iltis initiated widespread exchanges of specimens, accepted gifts and made purchases of specimens, incorporated so-called orphan herbaria, and commenced diverse collecting. He maintained a large network of correspondence, belonged to many professional organizations, subscribed to many publications, attended scientific meetings, and solicited the borrowing of UW material by researchers. During his curatorship, the vascular plant herbarium grew from 195,000 specimens to 645,000, a 3.3-fold increase. He and his students crisscrossed Wisconsin to amass the material that they needed to write publications on the flora of the state. And not only in Wisconsin, but they went on field trips to Mexico and Central and South America to study and collect plants. This is Dr. Iltis in Ecuador in 1977, leaning on the trunk of a huge kapok tree. He made collections elsewhere, of course, not only in Wisconsin, including in Hawaii. He went to the USSR twice, and he visited herbaria in Europe on 6 different trips. He made nearly 19,000 collections from 67 of Wisconsin's 72 counties, and untallied numbers of collections from outside of Wisconsin. On the high plateau of southeastern Peru, he discovered 2 previously undescribed species of tomatoes and a violet that is one of the world's smallest terrestrial seed plants. This is a view of the high, dry, extensive intermontane plateau in the high Andes of southern Peru and the habitat of that diminutive violet, which can be seen superimposed on a penny in the upper right corner of the photo. These finds garnered media attention, as did his roles in the discovery of 2 perennial wild-grass species of zea, the genus of corn. Here he is atop the Sierra de Manatlan in western Mexico in 1979. His right hand is holding onto the stalk of the newly discovered Zea perennis, the perennial teosinte. In 1982, the herbarium was moved into a new wing constructed to house it and the biology library. And 3 years later, we were able to buy a new mobile storage system and 206 new specimen cabinets, which relieved chronic shortage of space. And to Iltis's credit and that of the curatorial staff, the herbarium today is as well curated and as well housed as any large university herbarium in the country. Iltis taught plant geography, classification and evolution of the grasses, plant taxonomy, and taxonomy seminars. He made these courses truly exciting, owing to his expertise and enthusiasm. He encouraged his students to experience botany in the field, to take classes at biological stations, attend symposia, and join environmental organizations. He formally mentored 37 graduate students who successfully completed master's and/or PhD degrees. Taxonomy is the field of science that encompasses identification, description, nomenclature, and classification of organisms. Internationally, Iltis was known as a leading taxonomist of the Caparaceae and Cleomaceae, plant families on which he authored or co-authored 66 monographs, floristic papers, and notes. This is Dr. Iltis in the herbarium in 2007, 50 years after the first picture I showed, studying specimens of a Caparus species. He also studied the flora of Wisconsin, of course, and western Mexico. He co-authored 19 papers and books on the flora of Wisconsin. Having learned from his father and others who were intrigued by maize, also called corn, and teaching the grass course, which included the evolutionary history of cereal grains, Iltis was stimulated to investigate the taxonomy of zea and the origin of zea maize, cultivated corn, about which he developed an understanding that was unparalleled in scope. Of Iltis's 200 published works, 45 are eloquent papers on the subjects of conservation and preservation. This is the man in the new blue parka he bought in preparation for a series of lectures he gave in Alaska in 1970. He advocated for human ecology, the idea that mankind has adaptations to and biological needs for nature. He pleaded for the preservation of genetic diversity in situ at its sites of origin as the necessary concomitant of continuing evolution. He discussed societal and biological issues resulting from human population growth, economic development, and the complexity of modern technological civilization. In doing so, he wove together a remarkable amount of information from seemingly disparate fields. He related biodiversity's relevance not only to habitat destruction, overpopulation, extinction, pollution, but also to agriculture, ecological services, human well-being, culture, and even leisure. This portrait, which we've seen at various times over the past weeks, was taken the year he retired in 1993. Through his intellect, energy, and great love of plant diversity, Iltis helped make the programs of the Department of Botany outstanding. Hearing him preach that the world is under siege and that above all else we must preserve the natural systems on which all life depends was an epiphany for many people. Iltis was a shining example of an environmentally, politically, and socially aware scientist, teacher, and citizen.
Thank you. Dr. Iltis was an incredible teacher, and sitting in the audience are several of his PhD or master's students. He also had a great impact on undergraduates and, of course, everybody else he met. Here he is on a field trip, one of the famous plant geography field trips, this one to the southeastern U.S., where he was passionately interested in the biology and preservation of the insectivorous plants. This is a sundew, and we also saw on this trip quite a few pitcher plants. My first introduction to the tropics was actually with a graduate student, Dr. Scott Morai, who worked on the Lesothidaceae family. And we took a 6-month trip through Central and Northern South America, had many adventures. Here I am crossing a bridge in Costa Rica. That's me up on the tree trunk, and Scott took this picture. That's 1971. Apparently in 2017 in Bolivia, I hadn't learned much about bridge safety. This bridge is 1/4 mile long, 60 feet above the river, and obviously has no guardrails on the side. Fortunately, the train came through 10 minutes after I got across this. Scott is the world's leading authority on the Lesothidaceae, the Brazil nut family, and we had quite a few adventures on that trip. One, I remember, he was collecting herbarium material and taking notes and photographs, and I was collecting wood specimens for the USDA's Forest Service Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, which is the world's largest collection of wood samples. And one of the species of Lesothidaceae that he was collecting has a common name, Mula muerta, and that translates to dead mule. And the reason for this is the wood, as soon as you cut the tree, the wood starts stinking like a dead animal. It's not very pleasant. Well, after we came out of the jungle and we weren't very clean, we were getting on a small plane to fly back to Medellin. And so we had our carry-on luggage, which was plant presses and plant specimens, and a bag of wood specimens. And we knew where that smell was coming from. Fortunately, the plane had been delayed for several hours because of some problem, and the other passengers had been sitting at the bar at the airport, and so they weren't quite sure where this horrible smell was coming from. Unfortunately, the pilot also had been sitting at the bar during this time. But in any case, a few years later, I had a great opportunity to spend a year in Panama as a botanical collector for the Missouri Botanical Garden. And the powers that be at the University of Wisconsin granted me, without any problem, a year's leave taking off from my graduate student studies. I think they wanted to get rid of me. You can't imagine what a huge learning experience this was, from the rainforest to the beaches and montane forest of Panama. And there is no better way of learning about plant diversity than boots on the ground. And I might mention here another boots on the ground experience was as an undergraduate and graduate student for several summers. I had the opportunity to work with Cliff Germain, evaluating areas all around the state of Wisconsin for the Scientific Areas Preservation Council, now the State Natural Areas. And that was a huge experience, and I wish Cliff was here too, so I could express my gratitude to him. In this picture here, this is Ted Cochran, who just spoke. Bruce Hansen, who was a longtime botanist at the University of South Florida. Jackie Kolunke, who is still at the New York Botanical Garden doing research. And in the back is Scott Morai, kind of hidden. And Barb Cochran, I believe, is back there. And that is me. And this is our improvised umbrella in the jungles of Panama. And then I also, in Panama, I had the opportunity to be in the field with the super energetic Al Gentry, who was the preeminent student of the Bignoniaceae family and had done a great deal of work on the structure of tropical forests in the New World. I had a great opportunity to take several trips to Mexico with Iltis' student Bruce Hansen, who was doing research on Forschmeria of the family Caparaceae, which are trees and shrubs in the dry forests of Mexico. And this led to my first postdoc was working in Mexico. I'm sure that had a influence on it. Iltis discovered Zea diploperennis, and I had the great opportunity to travel with him over the Christmas vacation period when the first viable seeds of this were discovered, and that article in Science was in gestation at this time. And that sparked for me an interest in crop plants and their evolution and their wild ancestors. This picture was taken in Bolivia. Here we have 3 different cultivars of one of the species of squashes, or no, 4, 5, I guess, total in here. And this is their wild ancestor that we rediscovered in Bolivia about 15 years ago, since a colleague of mine has discovered it also in Peru. And these little hard, round, bitter, inedible things are a source now of germplasm for the improvement of these sorts of squashes. But this species, there are 5 domesticated species of squashes, the wild ancestor of this one and the wild ancestor of this one, which also includes the butternut squash up here. We don't know where the wild ancestor is. We still need field work. We cannot preserve the wild ancestor if we don't even know where it grows. looking for these in places like Colombia sometimes are a little bit difficult. I needed an armed guard as I was walking around a market in Colombia because they were afraid I would get mugged. These stories are all about us graduate students, but behind that is the fact that Iltis encouraged us to go to the field and do research and see these plants and see them in their context as we were doing our theses. He was probably thinking of an opportunity that he had as a young graduate student to go to Costa Rica with Richard Pohl, who became a world-leading authority on grasses. And then, looking for a thesis project, Iltis wanted to go to Panama. He was a student at the University at Missouri Botanical Garden in St. Louis then. He wanted to go to Panama and study palms. His major professor said, "We're publishing the Flora of Panama. You don't need to go there. We've got enough field work. Don't go." And that was why he ended up working on Caparaceae. In the several decades later, one of Iltis' students, Al Gentry, doing forest inventories in the canal zone, the best known, best explored part of tropical America at that time, discovered 5 species in 3 genera in a family that had previously been unknown from Panama. So fortunately, in conservation, there are a number of optimistic examples, such as the vicuña. I just saw one of these. I saw 7 family groups one afternoon in the highlands of Bolivia. They were hunted nearly to extinction in the 1960s, but they've made a very, very good comeback. We can't say the same thing for gorillas. The gorillas have been on a downward spiral for decades now, and they're still very, very much under threat. In the meantime, that 500-pound gorilla, namely the population explosion and overpopulation, is still the 500-pound gorilla in the room. And Iltis, from the beginning, as long as I knew him, was always very, very, very much focused on the fact that there are too many people in this world and that we must bring the human population into a reasonable relationship to our natural resources. And another good example of conservation success would be the Spring Green Preserve, which has the dedication to Sharon Wisniewski and Hugh Iltis right here at the entrance. And this is very near where I have just purchased another one of these Wisconsin river bluffs similar to this one, and taking the red cedars off and restoring them. It's about 10 miles to the west from here. Thank you very much, and thank everybody for their conservation efforts, and let's keep this all up.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please excuse me for my strong English accent because I have not practiced my English over the last 5 years. I am very happy to be back to Wisconsin, a place where I started graduate school 3 decades ago and met many botanical colleagues, some of them present here. But more importantly, Wisconsin is a place with an outstanding conservation tradition and great legacies such as those made by John Muir, Aldo Leopold, and John Curtis. Today, starting with this great weather, spectacular magnolias blooming all around the landscapes and gardens, a great variety of gardens, also many native trees in full bloom, and lots of spring ephemerals awakening from the winter. So it is a great occasion to honor a remarkable man, Dr. Hugh Iltis, and to comment how his expertise impacted conservation of biodiversity in western Mexico. Among the many explorations that Dr. Iltis conducted in Mexico, the third Teosinte expedition of the Sierra de Manantlan, led by him nearly 4 decades ago, consolidated his collaboration with Maestra Puga and other botanists like Rafael Guzman at the Botanical Institute at University of Guadalajara. And that connection unleashed a series of events that highly impacted the careers of over a dozen of Mexican students that now are teachers of a recently created PhD program in biosystematics, management of natural resources, and ecology too. So I was a 16-year-old college freshman studying agricultural engineering and working at the University of Guadalajara as a herbarium assistant, but I was also 40 kilos years, it was 40 kilos years ago, 40 kilos ago. So at that time I met Dr. Iltis and assisting him in the field during his Manantlan Odyssey, and I helped him to collect every plant. Basically, we saw, just grab that plant, climb that tree. So he didn't want to miss any plant. I mean, from a filmy ferm to a 40-meter high up tree. So it's incredible to work with Dr. Iltis. Our multidisciplinary crew in that expedition consisted of 19 scientists by the end of 1979. We were occupying over a dozen of camping tents at Cloud Camp over 6,000 meters in elevation. And while sitting around the campfire, we were looking forward to the new year and to the new decade too. And talking around the campfire with great hopes of finding new things for exploring this virgin forest at the Sierra de Manantlan. And this unforgettable trip ended up with the finding of a large population of the newly discovered Teosinte at Las Joyas, way up in the top of the mountains of Manantlan, the perennial Teosinte and ancestor of modern corn. So Dr. Iltis went back a few years later, in 1984, back to Las Joyas, and he saw several trees of magnolia that were marked to be cut down. So he immediately called Doctora Puga, the only friend she had, and she says, "Oh, I know what to do." And they together talked to the state governor and submitted a petition to stop the illegal logging of these old-growth forests, including many tall magnolias. So this action by Maestra Puga and Dr. Iltis was the first conservation action, really official conservation action. It was not because of the perennial Teosinte. Perennial Teosinte was an argument, but the first conservation action was because of the magnolias that Dr. Iltis tried to save, and that ended up into the purchasing of a 3,000 acre land that soon after became a scientific station at Las Joyas, where basically to promote the protection of these newly discovered Teosinte, but also the surrounding rich ecosystems, including cloud forest, pine forest, and fir forest too. Dr. Iltis described several, under the guidance of Dr. Iltis, I was able to describe several new species of magnolia from Mexico and Central America, including that magnolia that he saved from cutting, and I named that magnolia after him, Magnolia iltisiana. And we kept discovering more and more species of magnolia, just like Michael Nee pointed out. We now know that neotropical areas have as many magnolias as they are in the old world. So magnolias are in very remote areas. We only know the common plants now, but we have to visit remote plants to know the rarest and the endemic plants that are growing up in the Andes and the Amazon. So they are very rich Magnolias grow from near sea level to all the way to 3,000 meters in elevation, and we didn't know that. At the time when I attended medicine, I meant that magnolias mostly were located in the eastern United States and China. So the paradigm has changed a lot ever since. So through the international collaboration, we cataloged over 3,000 vascular plant species from the Sierra de Manantlan. An earlier version of this word was used as a justification for the protection of a 350,000 acres biosphere reserve, which is about the 2/3 of the size of the Great Smoky Mountains that you know very well. And it became a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, and it was the first time that International Biosphere Reserve was set aside, basically to protect a species that was the only source of resistance to genetic, the only source of genetic resistance to several virus and rust diseases for corn. So, in other words, it was a wild species of tremendous economical importance or potential. So, Dr. Iltis was an outstanding thinker and an everyday warrior, as he used to say, against unlimited ignorance and stupidity, in order to protect the environment and the natural world. Those of us who know him are greatly indebted to him, and we pledge to continue his mission to preserve this natural world during our lives and for future generations. Thank you. It has been a great honor and pleasure to be with you here today to celebrate the life and work of a remarkable man, Dr. Hugh Iltis, also an outstanding scientist, conservationist, and an excellent human being. Enjoy your day.
Iltis. It's an honor to be here today, Earth Day. As a boy, I walked with my father, Hugh Iltis, beside 25-foot-tall tree ferns in the Waikimoi Reserve on the side of Haleakala in Maui, Hawaii. I backpacked with Hugh for 30 miles in wildflower-covered alpine meadows high in the mountains of British Columbia. In 1977, at Dodson's Biological Station, one of the few protected forest areas in all of coastal Ecuador, we visited the nearby Centinela Ridge on the edge of the Rio Palenque cloud forest, for which years later E.O. Wilson named the term Centinelan extinction for the phenomena of incredibly rich biological areas that go extinct before we know what we have lost. Dodson and Hughes student Al Gentry collected many new species there years after that. My father said at that time that with politicians giving away land parcels as political favors, in a few more years there won't be anything left of this biological treasure. He was right about Centinela. Near Janesville, Wisconsin, on a 20-acre remnant of deep soil prairie that the Nature Conservancy later purchased, we saw white-fringed orchids, 400 different species, colors, and textures, an artist's inspiration that used to cover half of the state. Alda Leopold in Sand County Almanac said, "Someday we may need the deep soil prairie to rebuild the wasting soil to which we owe the productivity of Illinois and southern Wisconsin farmland." Scientists have observed in recent decades a significant decline in the ocean's coral and the phytoplankton that produces 2/3 of the world's oxygen and the base of the ocean's food chain. Yet Trump's administration does not acknowledge the scientific consensus on climate change, wants to abrogate our international Paris Accord, asks for a $50 billion increase in military spending, while equally cutting funding to international family planning to climate research, to the EPA, and other vital programs that Hugh Iltis helped pioneer in 1968 when he fought to ban DDT in Wisconsin to save the bald eagle, including the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts and the Endangered Species Act, which all came later. The wild tomato and disease-resistant corn species that Hugh discovered on a very small budget have proven to be worth many millions of dollars annually to industry. It is time to acknowledge, not undercut, the vital role scientific research has played in the U.S. economy and health of our nation and our world. In 1970, the year of the first Earth Day, Hugh spoke an ecological message at over 60 campuses across the nation, including Alaska, where he called for a 100-year moratorium on oil. My father accepted this award before he died. I accept it in recognition, not just of past battles to protect our environment, vanishing biodiversity, and ecosystems, but to call attention to those urgent global preservation struggles yet to come, and to advocate for a better scientific understanding of nature, of human biological and social needs for nature, and the optimal environment in which humans evolved. To paraphrase a paper that he and Ori Laux and Peter Anders wrote, published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists 1970, on criteria for an optimal human environment. And if I have any more time, I don't know, I could read just a few words from editorial he wrote in Bioscience 1970. Man first, question mark, man last, question marks, the paradox of human ecology. Butterfly and wildflower, mountain lion and caribou, blue whale and pelican, coral reef and prairie land. Who shall speak for you? My grandchild may need to know you, to see you and smell you, to hear and feel you, to be alive, bright and happy. The ultimate question one has to ask is this: shall man come first, always first, at the expense of other life? And is this really first? In the short run, this may be expedient. In the long run, impossible. Man is now responsible for every wolf as well as for every child, for prairie and ocean as well as for every field. Henceforth, the laws to govern man must be the laws of ecology, not the laws of a self-destructive laissez-faire economics. And what the laws of ecology say is that we, fancy apes, are forever related to, forever responsible for this clean air, for this green, flower-decked, and fragile earth. Indeed, what ecology teaches us, what it implores us to learn, is that all things, living and dead, including man, are interrelated within life. This must be the foundation of our new ethics. If you love your children, if you wish them to be happy, love your earth with tender care and pass it on to them diverse and beautiful, so that they, 10,000 years hence, may live in a universe still diverse and beautiful and find joy and wonder in being alive. There's a better version of that he gave in St. Louis, 1966, that I don't have with me. And I have put some of these writings back in 2009, and I plan to update it to include the extended obituary with reminiscences from many people, and very likely some of the material that was spoken here. If you go to www.botany.wisc.edu/ILTIS, Iltis, you can find Man First, Man Last is there, for example, that one pager, but there's also longer ones where he tried to compile a lengthy bibliography of man's needs for nature back in the early 70s. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. A fiery image, I think, of your father.
I could have said a lot more.
So stay up. We will unveil his plaque now, and then we'll, while we're doing that, Katrina, can you come up? We want to move the rest of the ceremony quickly. Let's unveil it, and then she'll read it.
Dr. Iltis left behind quite a legacy. It's an honor to recognize him today. Whereas Hugh's work in South America led to his discovery of the species Zea diploperennis in Mexico and a wild tomato species in Peru that had not yet been classified. And thanks to his efforts, the government of Mexico has devoted resources to conserving the habitat of Zea diploperennis. And whereas Hugh is best known nationally and globally for his extensive work as the University of Wisconsin Herbarium Director and in his efforts to protect biosphere reserves in Mexico and South America, and whereas Hugh co-authored the technical bulletin, Atlas of the Wisconsin Prairie and Savanna Flora with Theodore Cochran, and it is still used as a prominent source today after being published in 2000, and whereas Hugh championed the preservation of endangered and threatened habitats to protect biodiversity, and his extensive contributions to conservation efforts earned him numerous awards, such as the Presidential Award from the Republic of Mexico and the Nature Conservancy's highest honor of the Golden Oak Leaf Award. Now, therefore, the members of the Wisconsin Legislature do hereby commend and honor Hugh Iltis for his tremendous accomplishments and induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.